Good day everyone. I am Adrian Cyrus D. Ragay and I will be talking about institutional based correction. And I will be discussing about the global view of prison administration, prison antiquity to modernity, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul II, the profile Pope, Walnut Street Jail, King Henry VIII, and King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VIII. Leadership concerns and management functions define the essential elements of prison administration. Well, for most prisons, there is a normal title of prison leader or prison manager. There are persons in administrative positions who take on leadership roles and perform management duties. A degree in criminal justice or law enforcement, along with military experience, can be helpful in landing a job as a correctional administrator, especially in the federal prison. So you need so you need the degree of a criminal justice or law enforcement to apply for this job, or at least with military experience. Correctional administration can also include working with psychologists, social workers, vocational counselors, and chaplains. Correctional institution administrators receive a base salary with incremental annual adjustments. Correctional administrator often rise from the ranks of correctional officers. By the 19th century, the use of death penalty had decreased significantly and clemency measures focused more on incarceration. The early release of prisoners is usually due to clemency measures, legal instruments that reduce or revoke punishments. The word clemency is derived from the word mercy. Carlson and Garrett 1999 that according to them that prison administration fundamentally involves the application of both leadership and management techniques to correctional institutions. Under the general supervision on an assigned shift, supervise and participate in the work of booking, guarding, supervising, transporting and releasing inmates in the detention facilities. So these are their jobs. Correctional administrators should also have the ability to recognize group behavior patterns, individual differences, and symptoms of emotional disturbance. So, as a correctional administrators, they should be aware of the they should be able to recognize unusual things happening to the prisoners. And a correctional officer should also have the ability to carry, lift, and drag persons, perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, defend oneself against attacks, and restrain violent reasons. Stand and walk for a long period of times. Prison, an institution for the confinement of persons who have been remanded or held in custody by a judicial authority or who have been deprived of their liberty following conviction for a crime. The youth imprisonment subsequently spread worldwide, often by means of colonial empires that brought the practice of countries with no indigenous concept of prison. So most most concept of imprisonment is derived from the concept of Europeans. By the early 21st century, a majority of countries had abolished the death penalty in law or in practice. During the 16th century, a number of houses correction were established in Europe for the rehabilitation of minor offenders and vagrants. They emphasized strict discipline and hard labor. So these are the most punishments for the prisoners. strict discipline, and hard labor. Outbreaks of epidemic typhus, known as jail fever, occasionally killed not only prisoners but also jailers, and more rarely judges and lawyers involved in trials. The concept of the prison as penitentiary, that is a place for of punishment and personal reform, what was advocated in this period by the English jurist and philosopher Jeremy Bentham, among others. So this is Jeremy Bentham. The appalling conditions and official corruption in many local prisons of late 18th century England and Wales were exposed by the English prison reformer John Howard, whose works The State of the Prisons in England and Wales 1777 and An Account of the Principal Lazarettos in Europe 1789 were based on extensive travels. So this is John Howard. The public outrage that Bentham and Howard helped generate led to a national system of inspection and the construction of convict prisons. For those serving longer sentences, consequently, in the early 19th century, penitentiaries were established in the U.S. states of Pennsylvania and New York. Solitary confinement of criminals came to be viewed as an ideal because it was thought that solitude would help the offenders to become patient and that patience would result in rehabilitation. In the United States, the idea was first implemented at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia in 1829. This method of prison management, known as the separate system or the Pennsylvania system, became a model for penal institution constructed in several other U.S. states and throughout much of Europe. A competing philosophy of prison management known as the silent system or the Auburn system arose at roughly the same time, although constant silence was strictly enforced. The distinguishing feature of this system was that prisoners were permitted to work together in the daytime. At night, they were confined to individual cells. The concept of personal reform became increasingly important in penology, resulting in experimentation with various methods. One example was the Mark system, which was developed about 1840 by Captain Alexander Mokonochi at Norfolk Island, an English penal colony east of Australia. Instead of serving fixed sentences, prisoners were required to earn credits or marks in amounts proportional to the seriousness of their offenses. So this is Captain Alexander Mokonochi. So by getting those marks, the prisoners can decrease their sentences, or rather be freed. Further refinements in the mark system were developed in the mid-19th century by Sir Walter Crofton, the director of Irish prisons. In his program known as the Irish System, prisoners progressed through 3 stages of confinement before they were returned to civilian life. The first portion of the sentence was served in the isolation. After that, prisoners were assigned to the group work projects. Finally, for 6 months or more before release, the prisoners were transferred to intermediate prisons, where they were supervised by unarmed guards and give sufficient freedom and responsibility to demonstrate their fitness for release. This is Walter Crofton. The reformatory philosophy gradually permeated the entire U.S. prison system, and the American innovations, in combination with the Irish system, had great impact upon the European prison practices, leading to innovations such as the Borstal system of rehabilitation for youthful offenders in the 20th century. This description of imprisonment applies mainly to the countries of Europe and North America. In China, imprisonment was historically used as a means of reforming the minds of criminals, and it obliged prisoners to work in support of the state. So mostly they were sent to hard labor like that throughout the country. And imprisonment in the Soviet Union similarly became a method of forcing so-called enemies of the state to labor on its behalf, and in so doing to recognize the error of their ways. So they were also sent for labors. Most prison systems have different sort of prisons to contain these different groups, because there are different kinds of criminals, and they should be separated from each other. For the most serious criminals, there are high security prisons where the movement of every prisoner is closely supervised so that they have little chance of escaping. Wherever possible, prisoners are permitted to maintain or in some cases develop contact with their families. This is important not only for the prisoner but also for the family members, who have a right as expressed in Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, to maintain contact with their parent, child, or sibling. The earliest records of prisons came from the first millennia BC, located on the area of mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Exception from the rule comes from the home of modern democracy, Greece, which is Greece. Their prisoners were held in the poorly isolated buildings where they could often be visited by their friends and family. Primary source of their detention were not dungeons, but high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. On the other hand, the ancient Roman Empire, however, continued to use harsher methods. Their prisons were built almost exclusively underground, with tight and claustrophobic passageways and cells. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or chained to the walls, for life or for time. As slavery was accepted norm in those days, majority of the prisoners that were not sentenced to death were sold as slaves or used by the Roman government as workforce. One of the most famous uses for the slaves in Roman Empire was as gladiators. The most famous gladiator battleground, the mighty Colosseum Arena in Rome, had a slave army of over 224 slaves that worked daily as a power source of the complicated network of 24 elevators that transported gladiators and their wild animal opponents from the underground dungeons to the arena floor. The conditions in the European prisons remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. Henry II commissioned the construction of first prison in 1166, together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. One of the most historic prison legislation was introduced in 1215 when King John signed Magna Carta, which stated that no man could be imprisoned without trial. So every prisoner has the right to be imprisoned before trial. They should be judged. incarceration is perhaps one of the oldest forms of punishments. Prison facilities that are built to be responsible for holding up notorious criminals have gone through an amazing amount of evolution over the centuries. Bars and guards aren't enough in this day and age, and prison security measures today are as advanced, sometimes as primitive simple as they can get. ADX Florence, United States. Colorado's penitentiary ADX Florence is perhaps the most secure prison the world has ever seen. We're talking about a maximum lockdown jail where it is said that prisoners are lucky if they ever get to see the sun. With a cell that has no direct access, prisoners are locked upon the whole day, without any measure that could possibly help them get out. Next is Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary United. So this is one of the most famous maximum prisons in the world, Alcatraz. Perhaps one of the most famous prisons on the planet, Alcatraz has housed prisoners like Al Capone, Whitey Bulger, and Rafael Miranda. Located on an island 2 kilometers off the shore of San Francisco, only 5 of the 14 prison escape attempts ever made were uncounted for, who were presumed to be dead. Alcatraz shut down in 1968 but still holds the reputation of being one of the toughest prisons to break out of. You know, swimming never been a convict's forte. Third is the La Sante Prison. France built in 1867 in the very heart of the national capital Paris. France's La Sante Prison is one of the most famous prisons in the world. No exaggeration. La Sante is notoriously known for being the prison that once you go to, you're not going to come out of till you come out. Despite its location in the heart of the city, the prison's architecture of security measures are so simple and effective that it is impossible to get out. Arthur Road Jail, India. Mumbai's largest and oldest central prison, Arthur Road Jail is no joke. Built in 1926, the facility that was originally designed to house 1,000 prisoners is home to over 2,000 inmates at the moment. But apart from the rundown prison conditions and obvious human rights infringements, speculation, no prisoner has ever been known to break out, and no outsider has been ever able to break in. The prison spanning over 2 acres was built to be an impenetrable fortress, and it stands still date true to its nature. Fuchu Prison, Japan. From the simplest and oldest prison, let us move on to one of the most advanced security measures prisons have ever taken. Few details are known about the Fuchu prison in the western region of Tokyo, that has also played host to World War II prisoners in the past, home to some of the most notorious criminals in Japan. The Fuchu prison has a perfect track record of no escape prisoners. Well, none yet. There are more advanced security measures here than you can imagine, and Japan doesn't want anyone to know. Let's move on to number 6, Federal Correctional Complex, United States. Indiana's Federal Correctional Complex is a maximum security prison that employs a minimal number of human personnel. Yet, it is considered one of the most secure prisons in the country. Well, with 30-degree surveillance cameras under constant facial recognition, motion sensors, biometric locks, and fair amount of the shitty lock, most convicts has it's more than enough reason for them to not need more manpower. I mean, if Ethan Hunt had to go to prison, this one would be it. Camp Delta, United States. The prison facility at Camp Delta, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba is one of that requires no introduction. Part of the base operated by the American Armed Forces, it is a detainment facility that houses criminals that are considered of highest priority by the US. We're talking about the place where Al-Qaeda suspects were imprisoned and tortured. Up to 12 guards could be assigned to constantly watch over a single prisoner. In fact, let's say you even sneak out of there, you'd step into the middle of a military base. Good luck with that. Number 8, HMP Belmarsh, UK. HM Prison Belmarsh is Greenwich Greenwich in South East London is where category prisoners are as deemed by Her Majesty. Functional, functional as a high security prison since 1991, Belmarsh holds over 1,000 inmates which include Britain's most dangerous and violent. The security level of the facility is high enough for it to have been earned the nickname British Guantanamo. Number 9, Tadmor Military Prison, Syria. Built by the French Mandate forces in the early 20th century as a military barracks, Tadmor Military Prison in Syria is now known as one of the hardest prisons to survive in, thanks to its insane human rights violations and abysmal abysmal living conditions. As far as breaking out goes, the facility is in the middle of a desert, some 200 kilometers northeast of the Syrian capital, Damascus, on top of which the only way to get in or out of the prison is one tunnel that you would have crawl, which of course is highly secure. Number 10, Qinching Prison, China. Located at 3,000 feet above sea level, deep inside a desolate valley in the Changping district of Beijing lies a facility with over 5,000 security personnel guarding the most notorious prisoners of the country. Qinching was built with aid from the Soviet Union in 1958 and was originally used in the detainment of Kuomintang war criminals. The prison boasts of the tallest watchtower in the world, looking over a facility that is surrounded by valleys on all sides. Now let's move on to the most famous prison escape in the world, which occurred in Alcatraz. In its heyday, it was the ultimate maximum security prison. Located on a lonely island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz, aka the Rock, had held captives since the Civil War. But it was in 1934, the high point of a major war on crime, that Alcatraz was refortified into the world's most famous prison. Its eventual inmates included dangerous public enemies like Al Capone, criminals who had a history of escapes, and the occasional odd character like the infamous Birdman of Alcatraz. In the 1930s, Alcatraz was already a forbidding place surrounded by the cold, rough waters of the Pacific. The redesign included tougher iron bars, a series of strategical positioned guard towers, and strict rules including a dozen checks a day of the prisoners. Escape seemed near impossible. Despite the odds, From 1934 until that prison was closed in 1963, 36 men tried 14 separate escapes. Nearly all were caught or didn't survive the attempt. The fate of three particular inmates, however, remains a mystery to this day. Here is their story. So these are the three inmates who escaped Alcatraz: John Anglen, Clarence Anglen, and Frank Morris. John and Clarence were brothers. Missing on June 12, 1962, the routine early morning bed check turned out to be anything but. Three convicts were not in their cells: John Anglen, his brother Clarence, and Frank Morris. In their beds were cleverly built dummy heads made of plaster, flesh tone paint, and real human hair that apparently fooled the night guards. The prison went into lockdown and an intensive search began. Gather the clues, we were notified immediately and asked to help. Our office in San Francisco set leads for offices nationwide to check for any records on the missing prisoners and on their previous escape attempts. All three had made them. We also interviewed relatives of the men and compiled all their identification records and asked both operators and in the bay to be on lookout for debris. Within 2 days, a packet of letters sealed in rubber and related to the men was recovered. Later, some paddle-like pieces of wood and bits of rubber inner tube were found in the water. A homemade life vest was also discovered washed up on Cronkite Beach, but extensive searches did not turn up any other items in the area. So these are the tools that they use to escape. Homemade paddle recovered at prison. A similar one was recovered on Angle Islands. One of the life vests made by the inmates. Piecing together the plan, as days went by, the FBI, the Coast Guard, Bureau of Prison Authorities, and others began to find more evidences and piece together the ingenious escape plan. We were aided by a fourth plotter who didn't make it out of his cell in time of and began providing us with information. Here's what we learned. The group had begun laying plans the previous December when one of them came across some old saw blades. Using crude tools including a homemade drill made from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner, the plotters each loosened the air vents at the back of their cells by painstakingly drilling closely spaced holes around the cover so the entire section of the wall could be removed. Once through, they hid the holes with whatever they could: a suitcase, a piece of cardboard, and etc. Behind the cells was a common unguarded utility corridor. They made their way down this corridor and climbed to the roof of their cell block inside the building, where they set up a secret workshop. They're taking turns keeping watch for the guards in the evening before the last count. See the crude periscope they constructed for the lookouts. They used such a variety of stolen and donated materials to build and hide what they needed to escape. More than 50 raincoats that they stole or gathered were turned into makeshift life preservers and a 6 by 14-foot rubber raft that seemed carefully stitched together and vulcanized by the hot steam pipes in the prison. The idea came from the magazine that were found in the prisoner cells. They also built wooden paddles and converted a musical instrument into a tool to inflate the raft. At the same time, they were looking for a way out of the building. The ceiling was a good 30 feet high, but using a network of pipes, they climbed up and eventually pried open the ventilator at the top of the shaft. They kept They kept it in a place temporarily by fashioning a fake bolt of soap. So this is the view of ventilation grate through which prisoners gained access utility corridor behind cell block B. The escape. On the evening of June 11, they were ready to go. The prison informant, though, did not have this ventilator grill to completely remove and was left behind. The three others got into the corridor, gathered their gear, climbed up and out through the ventilator, and got onto the onto the prison roof. Then they shimmied down to the bakery smokestack at the rear of the cell's house, climbed over the fence, and snuck to the northeast shore of the island and launched their raft. View from the catwalk above cell block B, showing route prisoners took to access the roof of cell house. Ventilator cover on the roof of the Alcatraz prison, though, through which the inmates made their escape. The area at the lower right of this photograph leads to the water line and is believed to be the way the men went to launch their raft. What happened next remains a mystery. Did they make it across the bay, get to Angel Island, and across Raccoon Strait into Marin County as planned? Or did the wind and waves get the better of them? Solving the mystery, plenty of people have gone to great lengths to prove that the men could have survived. But question remains, did they? Our investigation at the same time concluded otherwise for the following reasons. Crossing the bay. Yes, youngsters have made the more than mile-long swim from Alcatraz to Angel Island. But with the strong currents and frigid bay water, the odds were clearly against this man. 3. If by land, the plan, according to our prison informant, was to steal clothes and a car once on land. But we never uncovered any shafts like despite the high-profile nature of the case. Family ties. If the escapees had help, we couldn't substantiate it. The families appeared unlikely to even have the financial means to provide any real support. Missing in action. For the 17 years we worked on the case, no credible evidence emerged to suggest the men were still alive, either in the US or overseas. The mystery continues. Officially closed our case on December 31, 1979 and turned over responsibility to the U.S. Marshal Service, which continues to investigate in the unlikely event the trio is still alive. If you have any leads or information to share, please call the Deputy U.S. Marshal Michael Duke of the Northern District of California. The Roman Catholic Church had complete influence over the life of everyone in medieval society, including their beliefs and values. The Church's fame in power and wealth had provided them with the ability to make their own laws and follow their own social hierarchy. Imprisonment under church jurisdiction became a substitute for corporal or capital punishments. In medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church developed penal techniques later used by secular states such as the monastic cell that served as a punishment place for criminal offenders. In 1593, the Protestants of Amsterdam built a house of correction for women and one for men in 1603. In Rome, what are now the Sisters of the Good Shepherd built correctional facilities for women, and in 1703 Pope Clement XI built the most famous Mitchell Prison as a house of correction for youngster offenders with separation, silence work, and prayer emphasized. As late as the 18th century, the Vatican prison still served as a model prison designed for Europe and America. Early settlers of North America brought with them the customs and common laws of England, including the pillory, the stocks, and the whipping post. During the 18th century, isolating offenders from fellow prisoners became the accepted correctional practice. It was thought that the long-term isolation combined with the in-depth discussions with clergy would lead inmates to repent or become penitent, which means sorry for their sins. Thus, the term penitentiary was derived. West Jersey and Pennsylvania Quakers were primarily responsible for many of the prison reforms. They developed the idea of substituting imprisonment for corporal punishment and combining the idea of the prison with the workhouse. The prototype of this regime was the Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia, that in style reflected the Quakers' belief in man's ability to reform through reflection and remorse. John Paul II, Latin Johannes Paulus, original name Karol Józef Wojtyła, born May 18, 1920, Wadowice, Poland, died April 2, 2005, Vatican City, beatified May 1, 2011, canonized April 27, 2014, feast day October 22, Bishop of Rome and head of the Roman Catholic Church 1978 to 2005, the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. Pope John Paul II is remembered for his successful efforts to end communism, as well as for building bridges with peoples of other faiths and issuing the Catholic Church's first apology for its actions during World War II. His Holiness Pope John Paul II, born Karol Józef Wojtyła, reigned as a pope from 1978 to 2005. His legacy includes the considerable ways in which his life and work have influenced our own here at the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture. His encyclicals Centesimus Annus Veritatis Splendor, Evangelium Vitae, and Fides et Ratio were the inspiration for the founding of the center. These central ethical encyclicals, together with other of his papal writings, further articulate the Catholic intellectual and moral tradition, the dignity of each person, the absolute character of basic human rights, and the fundamental importance of love and concern for others. Contesimus Annus, 100 years, was written to commemorate the 100th year anniversary of Rerum Novarum, the great 19th century encyclical that first explored in depth the implications of Catholic social teaching for modern economic condition. It extends the doctrines of Rerum Novarum to make them relevant to the new problems of economic justice arising in the wake of the collapse of Marxism and rise of an often vicious individualism in human affairs. Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of truth, focuses on foundational ethical questions and reasserts the traditional Catholic positions that genuine human freedom is inseparable from appreciation of the truth. It also argues against many contemporary views, relativism, determinism, postmodernist skepticism that impugn the relation between freedom and truth. patterned of on God's freedom. Man's freedom is not negated by his obedience to the divine law. Indeed, only through this obedience does it abide in the truth and conform to human dignity. Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, reasserts the traditional Catholic doctrine of the sacredness of life and draws attention to the many ways in which the sacredness is under attack in contemporary culture. In its withering attack on what John Paul calls the culture of death, it provides both devastating rebuttal to many current arguments that support technologies and social arrangements inimical to life and rallying points for those who seek to oppose those technologies and social arrangements. Fides et ratio, faith and reasons, is indeed to address the bishops of the church, philosophers, scientists, and theologians. The encyclical entreats all to question secular assumptions that undergrade the modern academy, and it maintains in a most countercultural manner the unity of the pursuits of reason and the practice of faith. Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. John Paul writes, and God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, to know himself, so that by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. Let's go to the Walnut Street Prison. So Walnut Street Prison was a city jail and penitentiary house in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1773 to 1838. Legislation calling for establishment of the jail was passed in 1773, relieved overcrowding in the High Street Jail. The first prisons were admitted in 1776. Walnut Street Prison. The Walnut Street Prison was a pioneering effort in prison reform, originally built as a conventional jail just before the American Revolution. It was expanded in 1790 and hailed as a model of enlightened thinking about criminals. The prison, in fact, was known as the penitentiary from the Latin word for remorse. It was designed to provide severe environment that left inmates much time for reflection, but it was also designed to be cleaner and safer than past prisons. The Walnut Street Prison was one of the forerunners of an entire school of thought on prison construction and reform. The prison was built on Walnut Street in Philadelphia as a city jail in 1773 to alleviate overcrowding in the existing city jail. Although designed by Robert Smith, Pennsylvania's most prominent architect, the building was a typical U-shaped building designed to hold groups of prisoners in large rooms. By and large, and role of prisons was to incarcerate criminals. There was little regard for this physical well-being, nor were there any attempts to rehabilitate them. Prisons were recrowded and dirty, and inmates attacked each other regularly. Those who served their sentences came out of prison probably more inclined toward a criminal life than they were before their incarceration. The main addition to the Walnut Street complex was a new cell block called the Penitentiary House. Built in the courtyard of the existing structure, it included a series of small cells designed to hold individual prisoners. The cells and the corridors connecting them were designed to prevent prisoners from communicating with each other. Windows were high up. The cells had 9-foot-high ceilings and grated and lowered to prevent prisoners from looking onto the street. Each cell had a mattress, a water tap, and a privy pipe. and a privy fight. Let's move on to Henry VIII, monarch of England. Henry VIII was king of England from April 22, 1509 until his death 1547. Henry is the best known for his 6 marriages and for his efforts to have his first marriage annulled. Henry VIII, born on 28 June 1491 to 28 January 1547, was King of England from 22 April 1509 until his death in 1547. Henry is best known for his six marriages and for his efforts to have this marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled. They were annulled. His disagreement with Pope Clement VII about such an annulment led Henry to initiate the English Reformation. Separating the Church of England from papal authority, he appointed himself supreme head of the Church of England and dissolved convents and monasteries for which he was excommunicated. Henry is also known as the father of the Royal Navy, as he invested heavily in the Navy, increasing its size from a few to more than 50 ships and established the Navy Board. Henry was an extravagant spender, using the proceeds from the dissolution of the monasteries and acts of the Reformation Parliament. He also converted the money that was firmly paid to Rome into royal revenue. Despite the money from these sources, he was continually on the verge of financial ruin due to his personal extravagance, as well as his numerous costly and largely unsuccessful wars, particularly with King Francis I of France, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, King James V of Scotland, and Scottish Regency under the Earl of Arran and Mary of Guise. At home, he oversaw the legal union of England and Wales with the Laws in Wales Acts 1535 and 1542, and he was the first English monarch to rule as King of Ireland following the Crown of Ireland Act of 1542. So these are the photos of those kings. King Francis of France, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, King James V, Earl of Arran, and Mary of Guise. Henry's contemporaries considered him to be an unattractive, educated, and accomplished king. He has been described as one of the most charismatic rulers to sit on the English throne, and his reign has been described as the most important in English history. He was an author and composer as he aged. He became severely overweight and his health suffered. He is frequently characterized in his later life as a lustful, egotistical, paranoid, and tyrannical monarch. He was succeeded by his son Edward VI. The wives of King Henry VIII. First, Catherine of Aragon. They were divorced. Born on October 16, 1485 at Alcalá de Henares, Spain. Nationality Spanish. Married Henry on 11 June 1509 at Greenwich Place, Kent. Divorced on May 23, 1533 and died on January 7, 1536 and was buried at Petersburg Cathedral. Catherine of Aragon was a Spanish princess who had previously been married to Henry's brother Prince Arthur. Henry was betrothed to Catherine by his father in 1509, and they had a daughter Mary who later become Queen Mary the First. Catherine had 6 children, but only Mary survived. In 1527, Henry announced his desire to divorce Catherine because She had failed to produce a male heir. Second is Anne Boleyn, and Anne Boleyn was executed. She was born on at circa 1500s to 1502 at Blickling Hall in Norfolk. Her nationality was English and married Henry on January 25, 1533 at New York Place, London. And they were divorced on May 17, 1536, and she died on May 19, 1536, executed for high treason, Green Tower of London, and she was buried at Chapel of St. Peter at Vincula Tower of London. Anne grew up in the family home of Hever Castle in Kent and was a young and beautiful lady in waiting to the former queen, Catherine of Aragon. She gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth. When Anne miscarried a second child, Henry accused her of witchcraft and had her beheaded on May 19, 1536 at the Tower of London for adultery and incest. Third wife, Jane Seymour, died. Born on circa 1507 to 1509, probably at Wolf Hall in Savernake Forest, Wiltshire. She was an English, married Henry on May 30, 1536 at Whitehall Palace, London, and she died on October 24, 1537, buried at St. George Chapel, Windsor Castle. Jane was born between 1507 and 1509. Henry married his third wife on May 30th, 1536, just 11 days after the execution of Anne. Jane gave birth to a baby boy on 12 October 1536. Henry was said to be devastated when she died 12 days later of blood poisoning. Jane was buried at Windsor Castle, later to be joined by Henry. Her son succeeded Henry to become Edward VI. Anne of Cleves. They were also divorced. Born on September 22, 1515 at Dusseldorf, Cleves, Germany. She was a German. And married Henry on January 6, 1540 at Greenwich Place, London. And they were divorced on July 9, 1540. And she died on July 16, 1557 at Chelsea Old Palace, London. And was buried at Westminster Abbey. Anne was born in 1515 in the small North German state of Cleves, close to the border of Holland. Her parents were John III of Cleves and Marie of Joliet. Anne married Henry in 1540 to form a tie between England and Protestant Princess of Germany. After only 6 months, Henry found the political alliance no longer to be to his advantage and so divorced her the same year. She died in 1557. The fifth wife, Catherine Howard, and was also executed. Born on circa 1525 at Lambeth, London on Horsham, Sussex. An English, married Henry on July 28, 1540 at Oatlands Palace, London, and died on February 13, 1542, executed for high treason of Green Tower of London, buried at Chapel of St. Peter and Vincula Tower of London. Catherine was born between 1520 and 1525, and Henry married Catherine Howard, Anne Boleyn, cousin and maid of honor to Anne of Cleves. In 1542, Henry once again accused his wife of adultery and had Catherine beheaded at the Tower of London on 13th February 1542. And his last wife, Catherine Parr, outlived Henry. Born at circa 1512 either at Kendal Castle, Cumbria or Blackfriars, London. Nationality English. Married Henry on July 12, 1543 at Hampton Court Palace and died on September 7, 1548 and was buried at Shudley Castle, Gloucestershire. Catherine Parr, also known as the Catherine Parr, was born around 1512. She was Henry VIII's sixth and final wife. She married Henry VI on July 12, 1543 at Hampton Court Palace. Catherine outlived Henry, so she is said to have survived. And next is King Edward VI, the son of King Henry VIII, monarch of England. Edward VI was King of England and Ireland from January 28, 1547 until his death in 1553. He was crowned on February 20, 1547 at the age of 9 and was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour and the first English monarch to be raised as a Protestant. Edward was King Henry VIII's only legitimate son. His mother, Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, died 12 days after his birth. Although Edward has traditionally been viewed as a frail child who was never in good health, some recent authorities have maintained that until several years before his death, he was robust, athletically inclined youth. His tutors, Sir John Check, Sir Anthony Cook, and Roger Ascham, found him to be intellectually gifted, a precious student of Greek, Latin, French, and theology. By age 13, Edward had read Aristotle's Ethics in the original Greek and was translating Cicero's De Philosophia into the language. On January 28, 1547, Henry VIII died and Edward, the age 9, succeeded to the throne. Henry had decreed that during Edward's minority, the government was to be run by a council of regency, but in fact, Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, wielded almost supreme power as a regent. With the title of Protector, factions soon developed around the king. In 1549, Somerset was overthrown by the unscrupulous John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, soon to be Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland put Edward forward at the age of 14 as entitled to all power of Henry VIII, but the young king was the mask behind which Northumberland controlled the government. The measures taken by both Somerset and Northumberland to consolidate the English Reformation, however, agreed with Edward's own intense devotion to Protestantism. In January 1553, Edward showed the first signs of tuberculosis, and by May it was evident that the disease would be fatal. Working with the Northumberland, he determined that to exclude his two half-sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, from the succession and to put Northumberland's daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, and her male heirs in direct line for the throne. As a result, a power struggle erupted after Edward's death. Lady Jane Grey ruled for 9 days, July 10 to 19, 1553, before she was overthrown by the more popular Mary I, reigned 1553 to 58. Edward displayed the potential for effective administration, but many scholars have felt that had he lived, his religious zeal and extreme obstinacy might have imprinted a much firmer and more uncompromising Protestantism on the Church of England. The Tudor crown, also known as Henry VIII's crown, was the imperial and state crown used by the monarchs of England and Great Britain from around the time of Henry VIII up to the English Civil War in 1649. It was described by the art historian Sir Roy Strong as a masterpiece of early Tudor jeweler's art, and its form has been compared to the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Description of the crown. Its date of manufacture is unknown, but Henry VIII, the seventh, or his son and successor Henry VIII, probably commissioned the crown, first documented in writing in a 1521 inventory of Henry VIII's jewels, naming the crown as the King's Crown of Gold, more elaborate than its medieval predecessor. It originally had two arches, 5 crosses of patay, and 5 fleur-de-lis, and was decorated with emeralds, sapphire, rubies, pearls, diamonds, and at one time the Black Princess ruby, a large spinel. In the center petals of the fleur-de-lis were gold and enamel figurines of the Virgin Mary, Saint George, and 3 images of Christ. In an effort by Henry VIII to secure his position as head of the new Church of England, the figures of the Christ were removed and replaced by the 3 kings of England, Saint Edmund, Saint Edward the Confessor, and Henry VI, who at that time was also venerated as a saint. The crown was mentioned again in 1532, 1550, 1574, and 1597. In 2012, a replica of the crown based on research by Historic Royal Palaces was made by the retired royal jeweler Harry Collins using authentic Tudor metalworking techniques and 344 pearls and gemstones. It can be viewed as part of the exhibition in the Royal Chapel at Hampton Court Palace. And that's all. The end.